Through painting, printmaking, and mixed media, she creates colorful, lively works. With stylized images and rhythmic patterns, she composes intentive flights of fancy. From simple to complex, all of them are imbued with a sense of energy and joy. On this edition of Art Now, we'll look at the work of Lisa Kesler.
Hi, welcome to Art Now, a program where we talk to artists whose work is part of our community. I'm Pat Sammann, and I'll be your host. Our guest today is Lisa Kesler, who is a painter, printmaker, and mixed media artist. She has a BFA in painting from the University of Illinois, with additional coursework in graphic design from Parkland and printmaking workshops from the Pratt Fine Art Center in Seattle. Her works have been exhibited as far away as Seattle, Portland, Sausalito, and Las Vegas, but they can also be seen in Carl Clinic and at the Muhammad Library. She is a member of Ladies of Letterpress, 40 North 88 West, and the Craft League of Champaign-Urbana. Thanks for being with us today, Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Lisa, what led you to become a professional artist?
Well, there was a definite turning point a long time ago. When I grew up, I always loved to draw, and anything arty or crafty, I loved it. So I thought of myself as an artist to a certain extent, but as a child, I don't think I was aware that someone could become an artist professionally. I think that the only artists I knew of were the people that were in the news, like Picasso, and never crossed my mind that a regular person could be an artist. So that really wasn't on my radar. But then in high school, I had a wonderful art teacher, and my senior year, she told us about the art department at the U of I, and she took us on a field trip there, which was really neat. And then the spring of that year, I entered quite a few pieces of mine in the Scholastic Art Competition, which people of my generation probably remember that. I don't know if it still exists or not, but it was a national program for high school students. And I won several awards. I think maybe 4 different pieces of mine won awards in that. But one of my paintings won the top honor of Best of Show. Wow. And it was on display then in the front window of Robeson's department store, which was a big thrill. And I think that was kind of a turning point, because that I think made me feel sort of validated as an artist, and it made me take myself a little more seriously. I had already been accepted at the U of I in another program. I think it was child development, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So as soon as I got to the U of I switched my major to painting, and that's when I made the commitment.
Great. Okay, now you've worked as both a painter and a printmaker, so we're going to start by looking at some of your paintings. This first one is Emerging Prairie 3.
Yes, and as we're looking at images of my work today, I thought I would just point out that really these are all from within the last 6 years, so they're fairly recent. I've been a professional artist for, I guess, maybe 25 years, but early on I wasn't that good about documenting my work, and of course we didn't have digital cameras. Right. So the images I have of earlier work are usually in the form of old photos or slides or whatnot. So we're kind of starting about 6 years ago, and at that time I had just moved here. I grew up here, but I had lived away for about 25 years, and I think I lived in Phoenix for about 11 years, and then Seattle for 13 years, and so I moved back here from Seattle, and that definitely triggered a change in my work. Obviously, huge cultural change, and the environment, moving from city to country, all of that. Right. Kind of triggered a change in the look of my work. And so this was one of the first paintings I did, I think, once I settled back here. And let's see, in this series I had started using some texture in the background, just to kind of add a little bit of interest and richness to the background of the piece. And I was using very few images in the paintings at that time, and I just sort of had them floating in space because really to me the painting was an abstract painting, and that's kind of how I approached it. So this was one of the first in that series.
Okay, here's another one called Garden Circus.
And this just came a little bit later, but it was the same technique using quite a bit of texture. I applied the paint in layers, and so maybe one color will show through behind another color, just adding a lot more interest. And again, the shapes I used were just simple, mainly silhouettes, and they are placed really almost as if the painting is abstract. And I kept the images kind of sparse because I wanted the color and the patterns and the background texture to be as much a part of the painting as the images themselves.
Right. Okay, this one's called Perched Visionaries.
I like this one.
Oh, I do too.
And this was, again, that same series, a little farther along, same type of imagery, but this time I wanted to create an all-over pattern and sort of the feel of fabric. And that's why this composition is quite a bit different than the other two.
Okay. This one's called Raised Beds.
Yes, this was fun. It was, again, same general style, same general technique, but I wanted to make a series of very simple compositions and then kind of piece them together as if they were a quilt. And so to do that, I painted these on sort of thick panels of mounted wood or boards so that they would have some thickness, and then I could connect them from behind with bolts. But then I decided to, instead of putting them together in a square or rectangle, which was my original thought, you know, thinking of a quilt, instead I decided to arrange them in this sort of irregular arrangement so that one composition would kind of gracefully flow into the next. And that was something really kind of different, I thought, and I thought it turned out pretty well. So.
Yeah, no, I liked that one very much. One question I had for you is, how do you choose and compose the elements of each painting?
Well, composing them, I would say, as I mentioned before, that I kind of treat the paintings, at least at this point in time, later it's a little different, but at this point in time I was treating the paintings pretty much like abstract paintings. And so the images were simple, usually just a silhouette, and I like to either draw them and cut them out of paper or draw each image on a separate sheet of tracing paper and then lay that out on my painting surface. And then I can move those papers around almost like a collage. And I'm sure that comes from the fact that I did a lot of collage work years ago or mixed media paintings that had collage in them. And so I sort of just got in the habit of having all these papers everywhere and grabbing things and rearranging them. And so that's, you know, I don't sketch, I don't draw anymore. I kind of use these free-floating shapes and drawings and then just move them around. And then when I get them in a arrangement that I think works, then I'll go ahead and draw that onto the painting surface. And the choice of imagery, and in these butterflies, birds, you know, I can't say for sure, to be honest. They're shapes and images that appeal to me, and I think that's probably because they are just have sort of a you know, give you a positive feeling and sort of a free spirit feeling, and you know, it's not conscious. I just gravitate towards those kinds of images, and I'm sure that living here, we're in a rural environment, you know, chances are that has some bearing on that, but it's not a conscious decision in any way.
Right. Okay. Let's move to a few here that are much different. This one is Fiesta 2.
Yes, this one, and then I think the next image as well, sort of signify a little bit of a change. And I talked earlier about how when I'm arranging the compositions for my paintings, I'm sort of thinking them as abstract paintings. And in this case, it is an abstract painting. And I was still using kind of the same painting technique where I used quite a bit of texture in the background. But in these paintings, I think, and of course I'm using very simple shapes, circle is basically all that's on here. So I think in these paintings, my focus really was on color. You know, I think that outweighed the texture, those shapes, or anything else. And I really was thinking mainly about color and, you know, how they interact with each other, what colors, you know, can be placed next to what colors and
Yeah.
what the result is and that kind of thing. That's kind of was my challenge here, and that was, you know, what I was thinking about with these pieces.
Okay. This next piece is Fiesta 3, and this is the one that was just chosen to be one of the murals on glass in downtown Urbana.
Yes, I just found out about that, and it's very exciting, and I can't wait to see it because I can't picture that in my mind. It's going to be on such a great grand scale. But when I submitted this image for that, I chose it because it is abstract, and I just felt like these elements, the circles, the colors, would look good no matter what, you know, on any scale.
Right.
And but I can't really entirely visualize it. So
Well,
I'm
you'll just have to wait
anxious.
till August
Oh,
and
I
see.
can't wait. I'm anxious to see it. Yeah, I'm anxious
Yeah.
to see it up.
Okay. This next one is called Night Clearing, and I thought it was just very interesting to me. I wanted to include this one.
Thank you. And this one, again, you know, I sort of approached it as if it was an abstract painting. I didn't use any texture on this piece at all. Instead, I chose to create a kind of a loose stripe pattern in the background, and it kind of implies texture, but actually it's a very flat painting. And then I overlaid all of these silhouette shapes in kind of an abstract manner. I always love the notion of positive and negative space. I don't know why I get a big kick out of that. So,
I do too.
And
so.
in this piece, I've really taken that to the extreme. And, you know, so it really gives you something to look at. And some shapes will come forward and some will recede depending on how you look at it. And it kind of
Right.
plays with the space. But overall, it's very flat. You know, the colors are all very flat. There's no shading or anything.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I think you can get a little play with the space just because of how I chose to use the colors.
Right. Now, one thing I was going to say that a lot of your work harkens back to fabrics and wallpaper. They have very strong patterns and rhythms. How did you become attracted to that, you think?
No, I don't know, but you're right. I don't think I could do a painting without pattern. I mean, I just can't even imagine how I would do that. I just have to include that, and I'm not sure why, but I have always been attracted to that, and I always notice if I see fabric somewhere or a vintage wallpaper or anything like that, I kind of make a mental note, and I never miss anything that falls into that category, and I think I kind of just file it away, and then those things resurface sometimes in my paintings. But I think, because I've been asked that a lot, and I think probably it's mainly fabrics that have inspired me, because when I grew up, pretty much all the women in my family sewed or quilted or something, and I learned to sew when I was really young, and went kind of crazy with it. When I was in high school, I made a lot of my clothes, and I think one of the things I liked so much about sewing was the design process and the choosing of the fabrics, and so I think I put a lot of thought into that, and kind of had an awareness then. And my grandmother, whose home this was a fantastic quilter, and she made quilts, at least one, if not two, for all of her grandkids. Wow. And there are a lot of us, and she pieced them all by hand and quilted them all by hand. And I can remember when I was little, laying on the bed when I was probably supposed to be taking a nap or something, but I can remember laying there and studying the quilt. Yeah. And looking at all the different scraps of fabrics and studying each and every little pattern, and I had my favorites. So I think that I just developed that awareness early on, and then it's always been with me.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's look at a few more of yours. This is a little bit different style again. This one's called Roadside. Yeah,
this came a little bit later, and it doesn't, you can't see too well in this photo, but again, I'm still using a little bit of that texture like I had used in the earlier pieces.
Right.
But then in this piece, I also painted out like the whole background with just a flat color. And then I've left the texture, I think, only really on the telephone pole. But but that really creates, I think, a lot of contrast between the areas with texture and the areas that are flat, and it kind of makes some of the objects then stand out more and gives them a little more emphasis. And then this is probably one of the first pieces where I started really thinking a lot about vintage illustrations. Well, and as a matter of fact, I can tell you, because a friend of mine gave or loaned, long-term loan, I'm not sure, this old letterpress that's in my studio here. It's a platen tabletop letterpress, and anyway, it needs a little bit of work done, but I have hardly used it, but when he gave me that, to me it just gave me license to start collecting. Well, in fact, I've got a few of them here. I started collecting old letterpress, what's the word I want to say, illustration blocks.
Right.
You know, the vintage ones that would have been used in old advertising printing, you know, back in the 30s, 40s, 50s.
Right.
And this one here actually is a tractor, which ended up finding its way into my painting.
Right.
And so I've used these a little bit here and there, but really they've actually ended up inspiring me to use some of the vintage images in my paintings. And so you never know where your inspiration is going to come from. But yeah, this painting was when I started being kind of interested in older illustrations and that style, and that has kind of worked its way in here with this piece.
I think in the next couple you can see that influence too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, this is Clothesline.
Yeah, I love this piece too. And this one is very smooth surface, no texture, and I was just, you know, even the, you know, as I said, I use a lot of pattern, but in here, you know, really the only pattern is in that background. It's very simple, but I think I still had sort of the feel of a vintage illustration going on here, and I've gotten away from just the free-floating shapes in space, and now there's a little more going on in terms of something semi-realistic, but it's still a little bit of a whimsical composition, nothing really truly realistic, and I've kind of placed some of the elements in sort of a, you know, whimsical way. But yeah, this was definitely a little bit of a different direction.
Yeah, and this one is Royalty.
And this is a larger, this piece is about 3 feet, so it's a little bit larger than the previous one. And here I went a little bit further with the how I use my imagery. I wanted to place the images in kind of unusual arrangement and have them interact with each other in sort of unexpected ways. So, you know, the crow sitting on top of the connected dot drawing, for example, and it kind of, it throws off your idea of the space, you know, it kind of plays with the picture plane, and I like that, and I also like having, you know, giving it sort of a childlike, innocent quality, but maybe not so much. You know, there's still a little bit of an uneasy feeling with the crows hovering around, you know, what's that all about? And so I kind of like, you know, playing with that, the tension that creates, Yeah.
Okay, and then we're going to look here at, is it several of your pieces?
Well, it is. This is
the billboard for Sky Gallery.
Yes, and I submitted an image, and I was thrilled that they chose my image to use on one of the billboards. But the images that we submitted had to be in this really long horizontal format because that's the shape of the billboard, and of course none of my paintings are. So what I did was I took parts of different paintings and pieced them together, and you know, it was pretty successful, I thought. But yeah, this is a new program, and it was the idea of let's see, it was Adams Outdoor Advertising, which is our local billboard company, and then 40 North, and they teamed up, and they call this program Sky Gallery. They chose the work of 6 different local artists, and each of them, they created a billboard out of each artist's work, and they're placed all over town. And then they are moving the location of them every few months. And so no matter where you live in town, you're likely to encounter them all before the year's over. And they're going to be up for a whole year. And hopefully they'll do it again next year. I think that's their hope, is that they'll be able to do it again next year. But it was, I think, an effort to you know, expose more people to the work of local artists, because it's really hard. And you know, as we talked about earlier today, you know, a lot of us are here in our studios and we working alone, and you know, we don't see anyone. No one sees us. They don't know what we're doing. And this is a way to just get our work out there. And for me personally, it was just a big thrill to see it on such a large scale, because these are not big paintings originally. And to see them up in the sky on that scale and see that it works, you know, was kind of cool.
Absolutely.
So.
Okay, the next pieces we're going to see are some of your linoleum block prints. Here's an example of one. This one's called Vintage Rooster. Did you want to say anything about that? Or?
Well, Just in general, the printmaking in general, that I took, when I was at the U of I only took one printmaking course. My last semester, I didn't think I would like it, so I just threw it in at the end.
Yeah.
Well, of course I loved it, and then I graduated, so that was that. And then when I set up my own studio, I never had room for a press or money for a press, so I just kind of gave up on printmaking. But about 15 years ago, which is I think almost when I did this piece, I decided to try linoleum block printmaking in my studio without a press, which is, easy to do, but it requires a lot of pressure when you're transferring the image, and it can be exhausting if you're printing a lot of pieces, which is what I wanted to do.
Right.
So I came up with a way to do this by using a lightweight tissue paper to print on, and that way I didn't really have to apply a lot of pressure. It worked really well. And then when the print was dry, then I mounted it onto heavier paper and added some watercolor and so forth to add color to it. So anyway, it was just this little technique I came up with on my own that enabled me to be able to produce the work without having a press. And I've been working in that method ever since.
Okay.
And it's one of my favorite mediums is linoleum block printmaking.
Great.
There's,
I
have
pieces here you wanted to show.
This is a piece of the uncarved product, and this particular one isn't true linoleum. I think it's some synthetic type of rubber that is an art supply, and that's what I used to use. I use something different now, but this is the finished carved piece that the Rooster was printed from. And I use wood carving tools, but I just love the process, and I love the character of the finished print. It's just a character, a look that you just really can't achieve any other way. And this is the one of the Rooster prints on the tissue paper as I described. So I lay the tissue after I coat this with ink. I lay the tissue paper on top of it and rub it with usually a spoon or something like that. And then when I lift this up, I've got the printed image, and then when it dries, I mount this onto heavier paper so that it becomes a more permanent print. And then the colors that you see were watercolor that I painted over the top when it was finished.
Okay, great. We're going to look at some more of your prints now. This one is called Jack.
Yeah, that's my cat, Jack.
Yeah.
And that was the same process. It's just a little, and I've got that here. So it's just a little tiny image. And there's not a lot in there. It's just a lot of black space. But when I did carve the little white areas, it was, crucial that I got them right, because the whole personality of this cat was hinging on, so that's the kind of challenge that I really like when I do these prints. But this is a very small piece, very simple, just black and white, and then I added the color with paint afterwards.
Okay, this one is Dave's house. It's a little more complex.
It's a little bit, that one I did at the request of a friend, so it was a commission, and it was a specific location that they wanted to have a little memento. And I specifically was trying to get the look of a vintage illustration in this, and some of the qualities that I think of when I think of old illustrations. And so, but I did use the same technique. This has a little bit more watercolor on it to really add quite a bit of richness to the colors. And this again is small scale, a very small piece.
Okay, this one is Ruby.
This was fun, and this is a good example of how you can use the actual marks that you make as you're carving the linoleum block, and use them to describe or illustrate the shape of something. So in this particular case, when I was doing the carving, I was very aware of the direction that I was carving, and I used those lines to kind of imply the texture of the fur or the shape of the ears, the folds, all of those things. And so in this one, the lines are a lot more crucial to the design than in some of the previous pieces.
Right. Okay, now another way you've used block prints is to mount a different print on each side of a wooden house, which is different. Here are a few examples. We have Blue Windmill House.
That was really fun, and a few years ago I was trying to come up with ideas for some new prints, and all I could think of, I was trying to come up with ideas for scenes or complicated images, and all I could think of were just simple objects. And I thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I got the idea to place them on the sides of a wood shape. And that way, even though they're each individual, very simple objects, you know, the finished piece is more complex.
Right.
And I have a friend who's a carpenter, and he had leftover scrap lumber from a project, and so it was perfect. He cut pieces in the shape of a house for me, and then I designed my images to fit those dimensions for the first pieces. And then since then I've been doing more, and the size varies, but the idea is the same with just a simple image on each side.
Right. Okay, I'm just going to go quickly through the next two. This one is Banjo Cornhouse.
And same idea. Each side has an individual linoleum block print mounted onto it.
Right. And this is Casa de Frida.
Yeah, this one's a little more complex, but it's the same idea, and that image is inspired by Mexican folk art, you know, Day of the Dead and all of that. And after all my years living in Phoenix, you know, that's definitely part of my history.
Right. Okay. Let's look at some of your more recent prints. This is Green Barn Owl.
Yes, and this is the same technique once again, and I think I was inspired by some old fabric that I had seen, and that one, it's hard to tell from this photo, but it's mounted on wood, and so the color and the texture of the wood shows through the tissue paper a little bit on that one, giving it just a tiny bit more interest.
Okay. This is Calavera con Gato.
Yes, and this was another piece that was inspired by one of the letterpress little illustration blocks I have. It's this teeny tiny block that I got, but it was such an unusual illustration that I wanted to do something with it. And so, you know, I took this and changed it and redrew it and made it my own. And this is a very small piece. It's only 4 by 6 inches. So I had to keep it really simple.
Right.
But on that scale, I think that it really has a lot of character too, because it is inherently a sort of crude and basic looking. This isn't a technique or a method where you can really make it slick and, you know, detailed. It just doesn't lend itself to that. And
but
so
that's part of its charm.
That's part of its charm. So that's part of the inherent character of it, which is what I like.
Right. This is Diego.
Yes, and this is a portrait of Diego Rivera. And again, I love a challenge, and creating a portrait in this method is probably the ultimate challenge, because if there's one slip of the carving tool, you know, you may cut off their eyebrows.
Right.
And so, but luckily this went well, and I think that I was able to really bring across the look that I was going for.
Okay, and this is El Raton.
And I think that's the most recent piece that I've done, and this one really, to me, does feel like an old illustration, which wasn't my goal, but it really has that feel, and I was pleased with how that turned out.
Okay. Finally, let's take a look at your newest work, barn quilt paintings. Here are a few of them. This is Lisa's quilt.
That's my quilt, yes.
Your quilt.
On my barn. That's just a little fun project I've been working on for the last couple of years, and kind of a little sideline business now, in fact. But I had seen some of these in articles and in different counties and states around the country, and I love the idea of bringing this uniquely American craft, basically, outdoors, and it kind of celebrates the rural architecture, and at the same time it celebrates the role of the women in early farm life here, and just everything about it I love. And when I saw some photos of other barn quilts, I got an idea of how I could do them a little differently. So I wanted to give it a try, and I've done several, and they've turned out, I'm real pleased with how they've turned out.
We'll just quickly look at Rhonda's quilt and Donna's quilt. Okay, and I think that does it for today. I thank you again for allowing us to come in and see your art. And I want to thank you for watching Art Now. Our guest today has been Lisa Kesler. You can view her art locally at Carle Clinic and the Carle Cancer Center, at the Muhammad Library, and at Framers Market in Champaign. You can also see more of her work at her website, which is www.lisakesler.com. We hope that you enjoyed today's show, and we also hope it will inspire you to explore the local art scene and to make your own art now.